Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about the effects of media on our culture, on our sense of environment that we're around in the landscape of the news, media, all the different things coming at us. And it's interesting to me how I just find it fascinating how there's different little kind of tribal subcultures that can basically exist within a medium that other demographics or age groups don't interact with, such as TikTok, that other groups will look at that and say, wow, it's like they're from another planet. And I thought, well, these are a lot of themes that my guest today talks about on a regular basis with great detail. And that's Katherine Dee. She joins us now. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. And so, I wanted to bring you on because I was seeing this discourse going on primarily on Twitter that I saw, and some of the mainstream media hosts were talking about how they were so aghast and outraged that um, folks, younger kids on TikTok were discovering Osama bin Laden's um, reasons for why he attacked us on 9/11. I guess it's his memoir or something where he's talking about the different justifications he felt in his mind for leading that attack, and uh, and so a lot of people are saying this is an example of China-owned TikTok, manipulating the minds of the youth to make them side with a, psychopathic terrorist, bloody murderer. What has happened? This TikTok thing is so beyond the pale in terms of its manipulation of the younger mind's perspective, particularly as it pertains to things which are considered to be loyal to America's interests. So, just with that kind of as the starting point, where would you like to start, Katherine? I mean, understanding these things is something you try to do every day in your work.
Yeah. Well, so the Osama bin Laden thing was interesting because it it's hard to define. I mean, it brought a bunch of questions to the surface. Like, first of all, how do you define a trend, right? Ryan Broderick, who is a journalist who I ordinarily don't have a lot in common with, but he brought up the really good point that the reaction to about a dozen Osama bin Laden videos created the trend, right? Like, so whoever originally brought this to the fore wasn't wrong. There was more than one video, and there were people talking about this Osama bin Laden letter. But what turned it into a more viral trend was the shocked reaction of a few, and it amplified it, right? Which really sort of a funny factoid. BuzzFeed, where Broderick used to work, it might have even been him. They actually did something similar like several years ago. It might have been, it's like almost a decade ago, where there was a group of people on Tumblr who called themselves homies. And they were fans of the Aurora, Colorado shooter, James Holmes. And they wrote an article, and there's only about 8 of them. And BuzzFeed wrote an article about them, and the article got picked up by CNN and got super amplified. And what was originally just like a few really like disturbed weirdos on Tumblr turned into a much bigger phenomenon. And the same things happened with TikTok. That's not to say that people don't have eccentric or offensive beliefs that they don't fully understand. But I feel like this was a very like, it didn't have a lot of nuance, and it was really like a very opportunistic story that not a lot of people really took the time to unpack, because I think they were starting with the conclusion, which was sort of based on a vibe that it was rooted in truth, and we're trying to work backwards from that instead of doing it in the reverse.
And what was the vibe that the rooted in truth, the fact that we're not, Americans don't appreciate the blowback effect of foreign policy choices? Is that?
I think there's a sense. I mean, the social media has really confused this. There's this sense that young people, in particular, but Americans in general, are losing, are losing faith or support in Israel, and are increasingly less Zionist, and not only not Zionist or like specifically disagreeing with particular policies in Israel, but even explicitly pro-Hamas. As of 3 weeks ago, and these things change so quickly, so I'm willing to cop to like this might be outdated, but as of 3 weeks ago, the data showed what surveys have been done, and there haven't been a lot, there's only been a few, is that Democrats are skeptical of particular policies, but still believe, as particular Israeli policies, but still believe Hamas to be a terrorist organization, including on college campuses. But on the whole, Americans are still pretty Zionist, right? This change is specific to Democrats, specific to young people, but it's not quite as extreme as you think. But in defense of the people who are promoting these kinds of stories, the posts that go viral really are pretty extreme. Like you see, dozens a day of people saying what feels like explicitly pro-terrorist propaganda that is, it's even past the point of I'm considering the Palestinian people, and into the realm of, well, if they want true liberation, Hamas is the only way they can get it. And it might be things have changed, but I think there's a distortion here of what people really believe and what social media is showing us, and it's making it seem a lot more skewed than maybe it is in reality.
So why is it that the more pro-Palestinian and even pro-Hamas and that kind of thing, why is that more pronounced in TikTok than in, say, the Twitter sphere? Or Facebook is going to be more older skewed now. Twitter, so I guess just broadly speaking, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Facebook would be like more baby boomer oriented, with everybody else, I guess, trickling down, tapered off the younger you get. And then Twitter would be like Gen X kind of oriented, millennial, and then kind of tapered off as you get younger. And then TikTok is going to be more Gen Z, and then tapered off as you get older, right? Is that kind of fair to say, those three landscapes?
Yeah, I mean, I think all three have, it's who's most visible. I don't even think it's really the number of people, it's just the most visible population, right? So the most visible population and the most spoken about population on Twitter or X is sort of the media class, and increasingly conservatives in media. And so conservatives in media are more likely to be Zionist. There's obviously exceptions to the rule. And so they kind of define the conversation. Whereas the power players on TikTok are more likely to be Gen Z, and they're more likely to not just be progressive, but on the left, and maybe communists, even further than just your garden variety Democrat. and they kind of set the tone. And the mistake is saying, the people who set the tone reflect the beliefs of every user. Like, I'm on TikTok, I mean, hours a day, right? I'm not even going to fib and say hours a week to cover my track. Hours a day. And like, I certainly don't look like the average, TikTok power player, right? And it isn't like converting me either, right? It's just, those are the people who are most visible. And there's different reasons for this. And I think it's a little bit naive to be like, well, like, China's promoting those.
Right.
I don't really think that's it. I think there's other reasons for it, especially because a lot of these people aren't exclusively creating political content, right? Like, a very pro-Palestinian TikToker might be mostly showing off her outfits or her cooking, and there's sort of a cultural norm there where, like, oh, well, you're leftist on this platform, so you throw in, the odd leftist video, but really it's like you're popular because you have crazy hair and you sing weird songs or something.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost. I mean, same thing on Twitter. There's certain norms that you have to adhere to, or you might get bullied or whatever. It's kind of just the etiquette of the environment. And I think it's a lot more difficult to say how much that actually influences people and how much that's just the nature of being in that place, right? I think of it a lot like, in an office, there are certain things you can and can't say. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're then taking those norms into other areas of your life, which is, I mean, it's sort of a weird argument, but hopefully I'm making sense.
Yeah, I wonder, is the visual, the short time limit on TikTok and the visual component of TikTok make it more conducive for the kind of worldview that you just described about being leftist and pro-Palestinian or whatever, like, versus the text orientation of Twitter?
I mean, I think there's something to it that, maybe people who are, there's right-wing subcultures or communities maybe are more inclined to have like substacks or to write more, and younger, more left-wing communities are maybe more inclined to make videos. I don't know if that's totally true. I think there could be an element of truth to that. But it's also like, who has the power to amplify you also is like another element of this. Like, a lot of the people who get like plucked from TikTok and might be able to get like cultural or social capital from TikTok, right? It's like, it's coming from left-leaning media too, right? So it behooves you to play nice with those values. And I don't think everyone's like consciously doing this. I don't think anyone's like, oh, well, I might get noticed by, so-and-so. So like, I better like not upset them. But I think, it's something similar happens on Twitter too, where it's like some of the most powerful people who are able to like amplify you. Even if you just look at Elon Musk is probably more likely to respond to you and bring attention to your account if you say something that's in line with his beliefs. And I don't think there's like a conscious decision where you're like, oh, I'm going to say something that's pro-natalist because Elon might notice it or something. It's just like, it just kind of shapes what you're saying. At the same time, I don't know if the impact on like what people actually sincerely believe is as pronounced as it might seem. I think it's worth examining these power structures, but it's a very tricky situation when you look into like, how is it actually affecting people's physical world behavior and what beliefs turn into action.
Yeah, what you we also have the big, the big story or viral clip of Elon, telling his the advertising boycott folks to go F themselves if they want to blackmail him for his stance on free speech. What was your, what do you think about that whole situation? Anything that we can take away from this moment?
I'm of two minds on it. I do think that it's admirable not to kowtow to them. I know a lot of people thought it was pretty goofy. I think there's they have a point, right? But it also, I there's such a like an unbelievable fear people have of advertisers, and I can understand it. If you have data and you're trying to sell a product, but the stakes aren't as high for Elon and Twitter, right? And there's a part of me that's like, if he wants to run his company the way he wants to run it, I mean, so be it. I don't agree with everything the man says, or even the way he is, governing the governing the place. But like, why should he, right? So what if, what was it, like Disney, right, doesn't want to advertise on Twitter? Who cares, right?
Yeah.
How does that even impact Disney? Doesn't impact Disney, probably doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really impact the culture of Twitter as much. I mean, I'm sure they're losing a good chunk of cash, but if at the end of the day it doesn't really matter, then let him do what he wants to do. A lot of people really wouldn't have the guts.
So you're saying that that this different TikTok is not just a product, that the environment there is not just a product of some Chinese bias, but rather a lot more complicated than that. And then you have Twitter or X. Who do you think is really like which platform is really influencing and moving the culture right now in America the most? Do you think it's TikTok or Twitter or something else?
I think it's TikTok, and I think the ways that it's influenced culture are kind of underappreciated. I think everyone wants to look at like political moments, but to me, it's much more visible with consumerism, right? Like, and I bring this up all the time, and it's been true. I mean, for like at least 5, maybe even more than that, 5 years, TikTok is really good at like dredging things up and then making it go viral, and not concepts, but like products. A few years ago, you would never see like certain Mexican candies in the grocery store. Now every grocery store in America has these certain candies, but it's because they went viral on TikTok and they started selling out and people started looking for them. And there's some grocery stores even have a as seen on TikTok section, right? Yeah. And I think that's really remarkable. You never saw something like that with YouTube or Vine or Twitter when it was in its heyday. It just didn't have the power to move things like that. And I've been clowned on for saying this, but it also has like, or it's really powerful with making songs go viral, and it doesn't have to be a new release. There's songs that maybe were really popular in 1975 and then stopped being popular that now you hear at cafes because they're TikTok songs, and when you're watching a lot of TikToks, you hear it so much that it gets stuck in your head, and then you want to hear it in another context. Television shows, I think it's in a way it's like brought back TV in a weird way, and it's there's receipts for some of this, right? Like The Good Doctor experienced a surge in popularity because it was clips of it were going viral on TikTok. And that's, if I was a Chinese government, I mean, I would probably what I would do, and I'm pulling a scenario out of thin air here. I'm not saying that this is happening, and I'm not saying that they would do this. I'm just saying this is what I would do. I'd be like, okay, I want to promote Chinese products or Chinese music or Chinese movies because that's what TikTok is really, really good at influencing, not necessarily people's beliefs, because I don't think people know one way or the other what they believe ultimately, and that's very, very fickle. But if you want someone to eat a weird food combination, right? Like, for example, and now there's stores that will sell this combination, as weird as it's going to sound, a pickle wrapped in a fruit roll-up with chamoy sauce and tahini, frozen, right? That's a TikTok food that now, you can go to stores and buy, right? Like, never in a million years. It's like a weird pregnancy craving or something, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of thing that it's really promoting, and where you actually see the impact. If I was a corporation or something, I'd be like, all right, what, weird shoe brand or the lollipop or whatever would I promote? Because that's what people are interested in, and that's where we're seeing a lot of movement.
Yeah. So you're saying, in terms of like capturing the actual day-to-day culture, taste making of society, TikTok can't be beat on that regard, right? Because it's moving, and it's typically, how the classic advertising holy grail is 18 to 35, right? Oh, we want to get that because of, but I wonder if that's still going to hold, because the idea was that's the coveted demographic, because if you get them loyal to your brand, then they'll be loyal to your brand for life. But I think that might be changing now, just with people rejecting brands more and wanting, something, like that doesn't seem corporate, big brand. But yeah, I mean, do you think that that's going to continue for, like, do you think that these platforms kind of exist, like you get siloed into it demographically speaking? It doesn't mean there's always overlap, but like if you're in the Gen Z generation, like TikTok, all things staying the same, politically in terms of what happens there. But if everything stays about the same, that in that regard, that your Gen Z mind will kind of stay within that Gen Z, that TikTok frame of worldview, in terms of that will be your go-to platform to check in on what's going on in your culture when you're 50 or 40. I mean, I know that's a long way to look for Gen Z, but like, just like, like Twitter has continued to kind of have a Gen X millennial capture through the years, and the boomers, it's, millennial boomer on Facebook kind of thing. Like, you kind of park there. You don't see a lot of boomers. I mean, I know there's probably millions, but you don't see a ton of boomers migrating with each platform. And in the same way, maybe you don't see that migration happening for younger generations. They kind of park on a platform that kind of reflects their generational mindset and vibe, and they stay there for a long time.
I think they do and they don't. Migrations definitely happen for different reasons. Like, if that was true, like, millennials would still be on MySpace, right? And that they moved on, or like on LiveJournal. It depends on like what the catalyst for the migration is. What has seemed to been true is that certain like cultural norms become fixed, and they bring that to the next platform, and then the infrastructure of the platform, encourages it or it doesn't, right? Even what's interesting is like and I do want to be clear, cultural norms, but not necessarily like the content of that culture, like the way it's expressed, but not what's being expressed. Like, here's a really interesting example. You see a lot of millennials who were, deep into like leftist social media maybe 10 years ago, right? Who have since converted to the right. And it's not that they're not authentically right wing, or that they haven't changed their values or seen the world in a new way, but the way they understand and communicate those right wing values are, is still the same way that they were communicating their left wing values on maybe Tumblr or Facebook groups when that was a flash in the pan. And so there's like a left, I don't even want to call it left wing, because it's not really about left or right. It's about it's about the communities that these ideas were fostered in, more than the ideas themselves. But you see the same flavor sort of communicated onto this totally new like worldview that they have. And I think that is where the things become fixed, instead of what it actually, like, what the principle actually is, right? Like, one thing that was really interesting is, like, people think like these like cancellation mobs are unique to like the worst expressions of wokeness, but I think that they're really something born out of like these digital native communities. And you do see that in some right-wing online communities where they do go through these like purity spirals, and people get canceled for nebulous reasons. And sure, it's not like a Me Too style cancellation or people being like, oh, you said, a naughty racist word or something. But it's still like, oh, well, you transgressed some norm, and now we have to like root through your digital trash and excommunicate you from the group. And that's, to me, that's just proof that it's like not really a left or right or political issue. It's a platform issue, and it's something about the way we use technology is reinforcing these behaviors. And every generation has a slightly different valence with how these behaviors manifest. So, Zoomers may not be on TikTok forever, but there might be certain like TikTok born behavior patterns that carry on to whatever the next platform is.
Yeah. And one crack at that phenomenon might be, from a mimetic theory standpoint, that the relative anonymity or rather the kind of disembodied experience of using online platforms in some ways viscerally recalls, maybe, I wasn't there back in the earlier times of human history where you're in a crowd and you're about to lynch someone, right? Lynch mobs in more recent years, but going back even further, what we talk about in mimetic theory about the scapegoat mechanism, like this kind of spontaneous murder that takes place when a community feels under siege because some of its taboos have been violated, or scarce resources are in a time of crisis, a plague, and or stagnation, whatever it is that kind of triggers a kind of bad blood vibe that can swallow up a community. And so it creates these taboos, which are there to reinforce differentiation so that one can maintain a sense of self, so that one doesn't spiral into undifferentiated rivalry, which is like disastrous for primitive societies. So one creates differentiation and taboos and rituals and rites of passage to kind of order and structure and protect those differences and maintain those boundaries of identity and behavior. And then if those things get threatened, because again, increased pressure for competition in scarce resource times or whatever, the community is going to circle around a common enemy and say, I really think, I truly believe this person is threatening our very existence on a visceral level. And they probably have in some way contributed to the bad feeling we're all feeling. And I do believe this person violated some taboos, and therefore we need to expel them from the community or kill them or eat them. If you go back far enough in history, do you see that as what's going on there with this return of, look, scapegoating happens all the time. It's a workplace, somebody doesn't fit into the vibe, and they're the new person or whatever, and they get easily scapegoated, and social bullying dynamics where someone is treated as the misfit or the kicking post or whatever. Like, these types of things happen all the time, but the way you're talking about it happening in such a mass formation approach online, do you think that's what might be happening? Is that when you participate in smashing, like you said, the conservatives do it, the leftists do it, canceling someone and going through everything they ever did, that looks like a witch trial. That looks like, hey, look, this person did something bizarre. They said something that they're not supposed to say. That's a cardinal sin. Let's go back and look at everything they did, and let's for evidence that buttresses this feeling that they're the witch or a monster or a scapegoat, and then they expel them if they get enough kind of social energy behind hating that person.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really astute analogy. And I think part of it is like there's so much noise online, and there's so much chaos, and it can feel like one of the only ways to like instill order. And I think in a way that's why people online are very attracted to sort of these extreme ideologies,
Yeah.
right? Because it's symbolic of order. You may not, I think, a lot of teenagers who like say that Stalin wasn't such a bad guy, or they want, a communist regime or something. They don't realize what they're saying, but what they're actually like longing for is order, right? And
Mm.
that becomes a symbol for the kind of order they want, because it feels like the Wild West online, and you feel like you said, like undifferentiated. And you see it a lot in like big fandoms too, where it's just hard to tell people
What
apart. And
what's fandom? What does that mean?
like groups of people who are like fans of something. Like you hear a lot about Swifties, or like fans of Taylor Swift
Does it
or
have to be?
K.
Is that term usually associated with like pop stars, or can it be anything like motorcycles or something?
It can be anything, but usually the ones that have like these like centers of gravity and have a lot of power behind them are the people who really like certain superstars or certain movie franchises is another one.
Yeah.
um and a lot of this, like, you know early on in my career, I said quite often, like, oh, I think this behavior is from fandom, right? Like we learned it from fandoms. We learned it from like the angry mob of Disney fans who wanted, such and such a character to look a certain way, and they fought for it. But really, I think this is just what happens when you have these like large groups that really don't have anything in common, where there's a lot of chaos. I mean, basically, what you're describing, it's this
Yeah,
lust
but I mean,
for like
fandoms would be like
coherence.
a modern vestige kind of like of like a cult around a god, right? Like, if you
Yeah,
think about different, whether you're looking at like ancestor worship, where you have like a whole village center of gravity revolves around what the ancestors wanted them to do, and like preserving and respecting the ancestral spirits or whatever, or whether it's down the road where you've got polytheism, where you've got a god for rivers and a god for the hearth and a god for the fire and a god for this town and a god for that, and all these different gods you're paying tribute to, and they come with their own little fandoms that are, I guess, relative. There's a spectrum of diehard fanaticism. Some of them don't have as much, maybe, and some of them do. And so, like, you know, Dionysus is a classic god that kind of represents the god of the crowd, like almost like a meta fandom god there, because he's like the god of the crowd. He's the god of like the mindless undifferentiation of order being completely let go for a certain time, and in a sea of sameness. Um, so there's different gods like that, and I would imagine that if human beings are not really that much different in their underlying programming from ancient Greece or whatever, so you could imagine that that same kind of longing for like cultic, like you said, cultic differentiation from the chaos would translate today. Like, I am a Swift fan and this is my identity and I am one with her, and I have some kind of like, I'm vicariously experience what she experiences through her public displays of emotions and fears and whatever, and she sings a song, and I go to, if I'm lucky, I get to go to this kind of ritual, this liturgical experience of worship with her, and the crowd feeds off of her and she feeds off of that. So there's all of that really is at play there.
yeah. No, I think you're totally right. And it's a way to like, it's a way to also bring back a lot of things that we've lost. It's a form of reenchantment in a way. It's not that we're in a totally disenchanted, secularized world. It's just that these impulses have shifted into a more consumer framework.
Yeah. Do you think that the like what I'm not McLuhan expert at all, so I'm just kind of a basic learner of some of the things, but Can you give
Me
any
too,
insight?
though.
Yeah. What's that?
Me too. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on him by any stretch of the
Yeah.
imagination.
But just for, I mean, if you don't want to speak on it, it's fine. But like, he talks about like the ratio of senses, and like your sense ratio gets distorted based on the medium that you're like in. And I know it's so complicated now with all these different media that we're in the internet world. But like, what's the ratio, the sensorial ratio of like, what does TikTok do to the human being that's different from these other mediums like television and so forth that makes it so attractive? Or is it just a network effect of everybody showed up there for my generation, so I'm there too?
What's interesting about TikTok is, it both forces you to like, so you pay attention to the platform, but not any one particular video. And so a lot of the effects are like, you have to engage with it a lot. Like you could be on Twitter and be distracted, right?
Yeah.
You can't really be on TikTok and be distracted. You like if you're on TikTok, you have to be on TikTok, right? And I can't think of anything else besides maybe video games that has that's excuse me, that same effect.
Why is that?
And
Because you have to watch what is the time limit for TikTok video? Like 1 minute or 2 minutes? What is it?
10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. Is that a new thing?
Was
it always 10 minutes?
No, it's new about 18 months.
Okay.
Maybe a little less. But yeah, but you can't like toggle out of the app. Whereas like on Twitter, you could be on Twitter and you could be on Twitter on your desktop and then be watching TikToks on your phone. You could be tweeting and talking to someone else. TikTok, it makes you, it's more absorbing, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is like, they know people want to focus on multiple things at once. So what you'll often see on TikTok is like, a split screen of someone maybe monologuing about something and putting makeup on. Yeah. And then underneath is, of like a still from, or not a still, a clip from a video game that has a lot of bright colors. So you can split your attention, but your devotion is really still in platform, right? So it simulates what we might be doing on our desktop with a bunch of different windows open and clicking around. And, I'm not fully invested in this or that, but all within the app, which I think is really interesting. Like you don't really, you also can't really like click out of TikTok, right? Like if you want to shop, you could like shop in the app. Some people have done like quite well, like advertising like articles they've written on TikTok, but it's also
because you can't use it on a browser. Is that the issue, or is it?
You can, but it doesn't. You can watch like one video on a browser. Yeah. Like you don't get caught in this like this scroll loop. Yeah. And I think that makes it. When people are talking about the power of TikTok and its potential, I mean that to me is a very like compelling data point that maybe they're right. Because something that could one of the things about like Twitter or whatever else is that you can get pulled out of it. There's still ways in which I think people become married to the platform and get sucked into whatever rabbit hole, but there's something of like in the infrastructure of TikTok itself that makes it hard to disengage because there's no way to leave. There's no obvious door.
And your observation of these different platforms, is it your general thought that being pulled into those platforms, as you said, is generally a bad thing for humans to do?
Yeah, I mean, if for no other reason than I think we're designed to live in the physical, live in the physical world. Yeah. You lose touch of your body, your feelings, the world around you. I think like, there's the really basic concepts, but like, online disinhibition effect, like where people are able to say these like monstrous things to others in comment sections. I mean, a big part of that is just like, you're not feeling, on one hand, like, sure, like, we could have a very pessimistic view of human nature, whatever, but, whether or not that's true, you don't have the same sensation as like looking someone in the eyes and saying, something negative about their appearance or, even a creative product they've put out in the world. And over time, I think that compounds and you become less and less in touch with your body. and you start farming that out in different ways, and like it becomes easy to see how people get confused with their identity and what they want and what they think is best for them, because they're not feeling it. And I think we have, a little diminished the value, even inadvertently, of like the gut feeling, a feeling of danger, or like a feeling of like, this feels right.
Yeah. I think it does rewire your brain in a lot of ways that we have no idea really yet. It's easy to say the addictive thing. Everybody talks about that, like it's like a big hit, but I think it's not just that. I don't know enough about, neurology or whatever, neuroscience to understand, I'm sure if we looked into that, we could see something else there. But like, for example, like I noticed that, when I do a lot of multi-tab browsing, I want to read that story, especially when I do like the news medias. You get this from like a habit of like doing radio live, and you'll tab, put that in the tab, right click, put that in the tab, and you get all these stories and you want to reference them, and then you just never get through them all. So you get piled up and you get overwhelmed with tabs. But I've noticed that it's affected my reading habits in a way that I don't like at all. Like when I'm reading a book, like I don't want to just, I found it hard to just want to read one book at a time. I want to read a chapter from this book, and okay, I want to and I want to read another chapter from another book at the same time. And it's like whatever was wired differently in my head about tabs, multi-tab browsing, has now kind of translated into a habit that's starting to pick up about my book reading habit. You see what I mean? So I don't know. It's interesting to see how much this stuff has affected us on a brain level, neurological level.
I will say, the optimistically, and I don't know if this is just me, like I haven't tested this at all, but I think as much as I agree with you, I do think it can be fixed. I'm very online, I'm very plugged in. But I take long breaks. And there's always like an interview with me somewhere about how I logged off and I'm never coming back or whatever. And obviously I have to come back. Otherwise I can't, I can't share articles or sell books or whatever. But I know when I take these breaks, and they're often like 6 months long, where I'll just be off Twitter, and maybe, I might still be on the internet in other ways, but not really in the same capacity. My brain like rewires itself. And I don't know if that's because, I had a childhood, I grew up in the 90s. So as much as I was a digital native pretty early, obviously like there weren't computers in classrooms or anything at this time. But it's easy for me to just relearn old habits. And I wonder if the sort of dark side of that is we're never teaching children these good habits in the first place. So even if they do log off, they're just like importing these behaviors into other things, and there's like they can't be fixed because they never had the discipline in the first place. So I wonder if like on one hand it's not forever. On the other hand, how do we make sure that we arm people with the skill set, so if they do want to log off and they do want a slower pace of life or less distracted pace of life, they know they don't have to learn from scratch.
What are your driving goals with your work to try to like I know you do mostly descriptive work, but do you have like a normative ambition about where you want to do, to move your work's contribution to like help people escape the matrix of this, digital world that people are being sucked into more and more? Do you want people to, is that your place, is that your goal, is to like the totality of your work to be like a kind of like trying to have people have like trying to show people off ramps to these technologies?
I think in a way I'm kind of like torn on it, because I think that there are a lot of benefits to mediation. And I think there are ways that it can be very, I don't know if productive is the right word, but you can get a lot out of it. Like, one thing I've talked about a lot, especially recently, is like, I think you can really foster true intimacy in a totally mediated relationship. That doesn't mean every mediated relationship will have this level of intimacy. But if you do it correctly, I think it's possible. And I think that opens up a lot of doors for people. Like, for example, if you have like a spouse who has to, for whatever reason, for their job, has to live in China, and you live in Nebraska, like, it doesn't mean that that's over, right? There's ways to maintain this connection. And without this sort of idea like, oh, well, maybe they have a shadow self or something. Like, I think there's ways that mediation can be good or even better in some cases. But then on the other hand, like, when everyone's so online and so uncritical about the way they're online, it obviously, many of the issues we've discussed here appear. So I guess, like, less off ramps, but more like, who needs to be as plugged in? I think some people do, and I think it's been very good for some people. Who doesn't need to be? How do you do it in a way that's healthy? How do you have a very technologically influenced life in a way that doesn't rob you of your humanity? And I think there's different shades of it. I think.
But it seems like the people that you would most likely need to get your message through would be the least likely to read the kind of content you're doing, right? I mean, not necessarily one-to-one, obviously, but like a lot of young teenagers and stuff that need to hear your message of technological skepticism or whatever would not be, like, where are they even gonna, like, you hear about this? I guess if enough influencers that they like, get on the same vibe you're going with, you're going into.
I think I also have something to say to, like, millennials who maybe, like, are very online and feel like they're wasting their life. I don't think that's always the case. I think that there's a lot of people who, when you look at, like, early writing about the internet, a lot of the people who were power users really were alienated. And maybe there's something to that. For some people, the virtual community is a gift. It's just, I don't think it's a gift for everyone. And if I can't reach younger people or people who maybe, like, would benefit from being less plugged in, so be it. I'm just one person. But if I can reach millennials who are like, who are looking at their life and like, oh, and they're saying like, oh my God, all my friends are online and I feel like a freak. It's like, well, maybe you're not. Maybe you're someone actually who it's good for you. Right? It's not good. Yeah. It's not good for everyone, certainly. Right? We've seen that. I think the last 20 years has really proven that. But, like, maybe there's something to, if you genuinely have autism, for example, or if your worldview really is extremely unique and you feel less alone, then okay, it's just maybe that's. It just can't be applied to everyone. I think that's the real problem. It's like everyone shouldn't be online, but for the people who really need it, then it is kind of it is a blessing because there really are people alone.
It makes you wonder if there's ever a way to have a tamed internet that would be an adjunct rather than the main course of your life at this rate, because everything seems to be going towards the opposite.
Yeah, I used to discuss this a lot more. But I think if the internet was harder to use, and this is how it used to be, it would create like a natural gatekeeping mechanism.
Right. Yeah.
And then, so if you wanted to become a power user, you'd have to, like, work for it. And it'd have to be something and I think this is true across society. You see this for basically every hobbyist community or niche subculture. The barrier to entry to join should be much higher than it is, right? Because
go ahead.
So it should be more like, you should have to, like, invest time to know how computers work to use them. It doesn't have to be like you need like a PhD in it or something, but like, and it should be a little bit more difficult just so you can't, like, mindlessly sedate yourself. And then what that does is, like, the people who are kind of using it as a crutch and it's just like whatever, they'll give up and they'll find something else. And then the people who, like, they're like, their whole life is being like a deadhead or something, right? Like, and they that's just what they live for and that's who they are. And, that's maybe like 2,000 people on Earth or something. they'll and this is historically proved to be true. They'll learn how to use the tools to connect with other people like them and live their weird subcultural life, and then it's fine, right?
Yeah.
And it can't be, it's not something that can be for everyone, I think. And then what happens then in a best case scenario is the easier things to access, like events lists or emails or something that where it's really a supplement and a helpful tool, then more people use that. And then like the real commitment, the real time investment, that's for people who like they sought it out and they in a sense earned it, right?
Yeah. What do you since you spend so much time thinking about these different online technologies and how they affect us, have you ever had any, or do you have any like kind of like predictions as to what you think the next TikTok would look like or emphasize or feel like or do at this point? Like what's the next thing that's going to come along and and draw so much interest in? I mean, everybody keeps talking about virtual reality and these headset things, and like Facebook's metaverse with the glasses or whatever, and then there's
I don't know if that's totally out of the question, but I think it's the adoption of that is like it's gonna have to be sleeker and it's gonna have to be easier. It's too like anything that's too much of a commitment, unless they sort of slip it in. It's just not going to take like.
But didn't he have some kind of new glasses or something that looks like regular glasses? I don't know. I just saw.
Yeah, I think Apple came out with those, but they're very expensive.
Yeah.
Like we were saying with like TikTok. Like TikTok is in a sense a big commitment. And there's two sort of takeaways from that. It's like one, it's on your phone, and everyone has a smartphone, right? And it's very easy to use. It works on even sort of like the bare bones basic smartphones you can get at the grocery store, right? And also like most people on TikTok aren't making videos, they're lurkers. So like, I think before we talk about virtual reality, we have to see like what would a world look like where like everybody's making a TikTok, not everybody's watching a TikTok. In the same way that like for a while there, everyone was posting on Facebook, right? We're still not in a world where like most of the users on Twitter ever posted on Twitter, and we'll probably never live in that world at this rate. So yeah, I think it has to, it's whatever is next, it's going to be kind of insidious in a way, or like maybe insidious is a little too extreme of a word, but like it's going to have to be, it's going to have to like sneak in, right? It's not going to be this like big change that, it's going to come under the guise of, oh, it's making life easier.
Now what you're talking about is the AI beast, right? The beast system of revelation. Is that what you're talking about?
Something like that. I mean, the thing about AI,
that'll work.
the thing. I mean, the thing with AI is like AI kind of sneaks in because you start using it just as a replacement for Google search, or like you write an essay for school and you say like, okay, can you fix the grammar in this? And then suddenly you're using it more and more and more. But when you first started using it, it's like, well, this didn't feel that crazy, right? Like it didn't like, so it's just, it's spell check with more options or something. And but then over time it becomes a little bit more and more intense, right? So AI, like that's something that might, sure, like AI might be a big thing. Or like, something, other parts of AI that I think people don't think about is like, there's so much content, right? Like, what if it's, AI that summarizes everything else on our feeds or something, or that summarizes our text messages,
right?
Things like that, where it doesn't seem, it's like in a sense very obvious, but in another sense, like, oh, I didn't think that would have been a big deal.
Yeah, like an AI filter on top of all the existing social media platforms that people are engaging, that kind of like reduces it all right to the cliff notes.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it like, what are the, I had a very interesting, and this is something I've thought about a lot, written about a little bit about, but there's this idea that the TikTok algorithm is psychic, right? And and to whatever extent that's true, obviously it has something to do, it's like the same thing with targeted ads. It's because it's collecting data on you and then serving you what's most relevant. Well, add AI to that, like what what about an AI that reads all your text messages and then can give you like a quote unquote like psychic reading, but really that's just analyzing things that it's gathering from you on your phone.
Yeah.
Right. It looks at your browser history. And I think there's things like that like, an evolution of targeted ads. Then like, how would that change society? I'm not really sure.
Yeah. I still wonder if this new young generation, they call it Generation Alpha, if they're going to have a total like revolutionary break from the whole digital thing. I don't know. Maybe it's just like a romantic longing.
I don't know. I don't know if that's so crazy.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is, you see all these videos about Gen Alpha being like more unruly, but what you don't hear is that this is actually like kind of class based, because like the parents in my life, they're like they tell me like, there's a lot of pressure to not give your kids an iPad or to have a technology free household, and it's almost a trend, right? And it's like, are we going to have let's say like upper middle and upper class of people who did give their kids these skills, and they did have sort of a screen-free upbringing because of social pressure, and then the working class is all iPad kids. And what is that going to do?
Yeah, what would that look like?
That
we kind of already have that today on a kind of more subtle scale. Like the rich kids, the really rich kids can travel to Paris. They can have a snowboard instructor. You know what I mean? They can do things in the middle class and working class kids. They work dead end jobs and look on their phone all day. You know what I mean? So we already kind of have that, but because the real world to really explore the real world in some ways, by our standards today, it costs a lot of money compared to being online, right? So
yeah. I mean, I think Mark Andreessen called this reality privilege, and I don't totally remember the essay, but I mean, I think there's some, assuming we're talking about the same thing, I think there's something to that, and it's almost more dystopian.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and then there's just so much mixed messaging about that, with like the effects of these ubiquitous streaming technologies to kids' minds, especially when they're young. Like, some people are so bullish on it, and they say, "Oh no, come on, give me a break. You gotta understand that this is the fount of knowledge beyond anything humans have had access to. Just let the children explore. That's the world they're going to be in. You got to let them just dive in all the time as much as you can. What are you, Luddite? And then there's the other extreme, which says, you have to have the Danish carved wooden dolls or something, or something like that, only in the house. No technology at all in terms of media, internet technology. But yeah, it's I think that could very well be the case if there is no, like, if we can't get out of this stagnation that we're in the West, in terms of like real innovation in the world of atoms. I could definitely see that being a really hellish situation where reality is a privilege that only some are able to fully enjoy, and others have to basically just enjoy the digital kind of window to that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I mean, another, I don't want to I assume we're running out of time, so I don't want to open up a Pandora's box of other things, but important component of this is probably education too, and who's truly being educated. And increasingly that's a privilege to, I mean, it's been this way for a minute, but it's even more pronounced than it was when I was younger. Who really has access to education? Our public schools are basically kind of scary daycares, depending on where you live. And only people who have the resource, and this isn't always class-based, right? Like, you could, maybe you're lucky enough to be in a religious community that is thinking about these questions, right? And that you don't necessarily have to be very wealthy, but like, it's not everyone it has the resources to homeschool their kids or send their kids to a private school or a school that's more carefully curated. And I think that's another thing where we're not going to like what that's going to look like. You hear a lot of things about like, oh, well, kids aren't reading at the right pace, and people blame COVID mandates, and maybe there's an element of that, but it's also just like we have a teacher shortage, right? Yeah. And the teachers we do have aren't necessarily well educated themselves, and then there's all these other problems compounding, right? And issues with crime kind of fits into this, and it's a very, very complex problem, and it's that's something that's really scary to me.
Yeah, I think
right,
it's, like it's like I think this is like the fruition of the like Gnostic scientism religion that we've been in for a long time in the West, and it's the biggest thing is something I like to say is that, like, I think that belief in an afterlife is going to return in a big way. But the problem of our culture is that that's not enough, because if you have a return to the belief in an afterlife in a spirit world or whatever, but you don't have a belief in the future of the earth, that's not any fun place to be in anyway. So like the belief, faith in the spirit is going to come back, and is probably coming back in some ways at a faster clip than faith in the body, right? Like incarnated body, like the earth, the future of your society, the future of like your body's ability to fight off infectious diseases and like to just live an embodied life. That's on the down, right? Everybody, we can't figure out. We had a war on cancer since Nixon. Nothing's there. We just have to marginally give billionaires more billions and billions and billions and billions to chase these kind of Gnostic paradigms of solving cancer, which still are stuck on the stupid notion that it's like a genetic driven disease, that's a Gnostic bias. Like, okay, we got to go into the world of information inside this DNA to solve this disease that never showed up until we started eating a certain way in the 20th century. But like all of this Gnostic kind of hatred and disregard of the human body and earth, both of those things together, and like what can be done in the physical world, I think that's the biggest thing holding us back. And I think the more we keep that mindset going, the more cynical we'll be, and the more ugly and like just a long ride of meaninglessness and nihilism will continue to affect our digital enclosed lives. I think if you can solve cancers and solve diabetes and solve heart disease and these diseases of civilization, as they call them, and really like recover hope in the body and like really demonstrable defeating of diseases, like we don't think about yellow fever or the things that were killing the founding fathers' kids left and right. We don't think about those were defeated enemies. Like we're kind of confident about some of those old diseases when we live in the world today. If we can have that same defeat in our lifetime of some of these diseases of civilization that don't cost an arm and a leg to afford and don't have horrible side effects in taking the solution for these diseases, I think that would do a lot to like make us healthier again, not just physically, but spiritually, mentally, and so forth. And in our relationship to the world. If you believe we've reached the end of history, if you believe that everything is materialism, it's all meaninglessness, there's no real goodness behind anything that we were created to be, then nothing excites you and nothing gives you wonder, even to the point when they do this alien thing. That's one of the things I've been so interested by, is the huge cynical reaction, the hugely boring and just not buying it narrative around aliens. Like, oh, aliens are, the government's got all these ships and there's biologics. And yes, that's a product of being lied to for a million times by these governments. I get it. But if this was the 90s, the world was way more enchanted with the weird stuff out there in the 90s. If this was happening in the 90s, I mean, I don't know. I don't think people, they would lose their minds over this stuff. And now every time I see, Tucker just did a thing about the latest UFO thing, and, people are just yawning like, whatever. Let's just go back to whatever is going on with TikTok or Taylor Swift or whatever. And it's like, I think this is a product of a world that doesn't believe in the future of the earth and doesn't believe in the body, and
yeah, I think that's right. And I think what you're explaining too also is, kind of helps explain why faith is so transactional. Like I feel like I've noticed like faith coming back in a way, or like maybe it never left, it just evolved. But it's like this idea that religion or just even spirituality, its purpose is to give you something, and not give you something in the sense of like, it's giving me gratitude or appreciation or insight, or anything like this, any of the more traditional reasons, meaning. It's like, I believe in even myself, so I can so I can be in transaction with the universe and get something, money, happiness, but happiness as an object, not happiness as like a more holistic thing. And I think you're right. Like, this is all, a big part of this is like, we're not in touch with our bodies.
right. And we believe that everything substantial that needed to be like discovered has been discovered, and that's it. And that's just such a boring, like, that's such a terrible way to think about the world. But I really appreciate your time and your thoughts here in this conversation. So would you give us a little plug about, where we can find your work and stay in touch with what you're doing?
Yeah. I write pretty regularly for The Blaze. Just, typing Katherine Dee, The Blaze, and first Google search. And I also write on my blog at default.blog, and, at Unheard and Tablet, and, wherever, wherever else. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.